Create in me a clean heart and purify me. Create in me a clean heart so Our next topic on our time today is entitled Black Rage. And the panel leader is Lawrence Rodgers. And I'm excited for this panel. Lawrence is a good friend. I would say he's my traveling buddy. We spent about 2 weeks together in Swaziland with Doc Taylor and another one of our brothers. And Lawrence and we I had a hoot. I don't know if Lawrence did, but it was a good time to be in that space and learn from my brothers and sisters on the continent there. Lawrence is a graduate of Harding University, where he studied Bible and ministry. He graduated with honors, including most outstanding Bible and ministry major. Lawrence is a 2017 graduate of Howard University School of Divinity, where he earned his master's degree in divinity. Um, uh, he is regularly preaching on lecture circuits and teaching college classes and congregational classes, and doing all that while holding down the fort as the pastor over at Westside Church of Christ congregation in Baltimore, Maryland. He's happily married with two beautiful children, and so without any further ado, I hand it over to Lawrence.
Thank you so much, Brother Byron. Yes, I did enjoy that trip. I really enjoyed that time getting to know you, and we had great conversations. And I enjoyed climbing the mountain with you and seeing the beautiful landscape right after I got off the plane and was ready to go. So I'm so grateful for that, Brother Byron. And also thank you for your warm introduction. I also want to thank the Carl Spain Center for the wonderful work that it's done. Wonderful events have been taking place that have been raising the consciousness, not only of the Church of Christ, but of, the broader community that are engaging our videos and these live streams, these conferences. I want to also offer special blessings to Dr. Taylor, his wonderful family. Thank you so much for the great work that you're doing, Dr. Taylor, through the Carl Spain Center, a vision that you've had for such a long time. And I'm just so happy to see the first petals of its bloom starting to show. So God bless you all. We have a wonderful panel ahead of us. We have Alisha Taylor, Brittney Thornton, and Russell Pointer Jr. So it's important to note that we have a Russell Pointer Sr. with us and also a Russell Pointer Jr. who's doing a wonderful work as well. And I would like them to take just a few seconds to quickly introduce themselves. So Brittney Thornton, can you quickly introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittney Thornton. I'm a native of Memphis. I am an organizer here in Memphis for a nonprofit called Juice Orange Mound, which I founded in 2016. We do all things organizing, all things community development, and really are creating this really thoughtful model around spare change. And so we use spare change and use it to fund community-based projects. This whole effort is just, really in response to the lack of investment for the community. And so I'm excited. The book, I just want to name, I'm a public school turned private school kid. And so as I was reading the book, a lot of my personal experiences just navigating different levels of class really were conjured up. And so I'm a graduate from Baylor University and the University of Pennsylvania, and my degrees are in social work. So we'll learn more about me throughout the panel, but I'm excited to be with everyone, and thank you for this opportunity.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Sister Alisha Taylor, could you quickly introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alisha Taylor. I graduated from ACU in 2017 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, concentrated in musical theater. So I am an actor and a filmmaker. I've performed several times in New York, and I had a short film premiere at the Pan-African Film Festival in 2018. I'm very passionate about telling Black narratives in an authentic and genuine way, and taking the things that we're discussing within these events and putting them in film and on stage, because I may not be able to get everyone to read a 200-page book, but I can get you to watch a film for 10 minutes, an hour, hour and a half. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today and just have it inform my creative work.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alisha. And Russell Pointer Jr.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Russell Andrew Pointer Jr., a graduate of Morehouse College, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as well as Vanderbilt Divinity School. I'm currently a Doctor of Ministry student at Boston University School of Theology. And I'm just happy to be on this panel. Thankful to Dr. Taylor, who I consider to be family. I call him Unc. And I'm thankful for what Dr. Taylor is up there doing with the Carl Spain Center, as well as my dad, who's one of the co-hosts, Dr. Pointer, at Minneapolis Central Church of Christ. And so I'm in great company. I think that's enough about me. Reformation Church here in Nashville is where I'm the lead servant and the minister. And I'm just blessed to be here and looking forward to transformative dialogue.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to be covering the book today, Black Rage by William Grier and Price Cobbs. I think it's important to note before we begin with this book that this book was written in 1968. So the panel after us is covering a book called White Rage, which was written, I believe, in 2016. This is the book that was written in 1968. And the reason why it was written was, I shouldn't say the reason, but it was released after the assassination of Dr. King and the riots that took place all around the country. This book was written in that era. And so it's a book that is dealing with anger and rage in Black folks. And the book has a broad scope. And so I will assure you today that we will not be able to cover the entire scope of this book. I strongly recommend that you read it yourself. But keep in mind that this book was written in 1968. And I want you to know that it's a book that is written from a bit of a androcentric perspective. So, when you read it, you hear a lot about man, in the sense of mankind. And you have to parse that out also with humanity. Okay, but it's important to note that the book was written in 1968. And so that's how things were written at that time. So for our panelists, they had to do several things at once for this volume. First off, they had to read it and distill it, but then they had to contextualize it, bring it forward, all right, to 2020, and then be able to say, how does this relate to me? So they had a lot of bridges to cross to cover this book because it is written in 1968. And so, we had to do a lot of contextualization and some proper framework activity. And so before we jump into it, I would just like to first off ask the panel, what were any weaknesses that you experienced with this particular volume?
Yeah, I think it's a very valuable piece of work, literature, a life's work, even to a certain extent. As we were kind of discussing it, I felt like the author, and based on the time it was written, was lacking some intersectionality. Intersectionality meaning looking at intersections and where things cross. And so particularly in the context of the Black community, looking at Black women as a people and as part of our community that is doubly or dually oppressed. And so you have the intersectionality of being oppressed because of your race, which has been well articulated today, but also because of your gender, which is another part to it. And I don't think at this time that they really looked at intersectionality, even when you look at cases such as Breonna Taylor, right? There's nuance and there's intersectionality there. And then places where sometimes a Black man is oppressed, but then when we come to the community, in the Black community, we're kind of have a certain amount of power and privilege that Black women aren't usually afforded in any spaces. And there's other types of intersectionality that may be missing as well in terms of sexual orientation and things of that nature, but specifically and namely Black women, that nuance was kind of missing from this book, and I think it deserves to be stated.
Thank you so much. So we want to honor the fact from the very beginning of covering this book that it has these weaknesses. However, despite the fact that this book has its weaknesses, there are still things for us to learn, and there are big lessons from this book, and that's what we're going to elevate at this moment. So we're going to begin by jumping right to the end of the book, where in the section of mental illness and treatment, there's a concept called the Black norm. And this is on page 177. They say that we submit that it is necessary for a Black man, but we're going to make this gender inclusive, for a Black person in America to develop a profound distrust of his white fellow citizens and of the nation. So in other words, they're saying that in order for a Black person to be healthy with their mental health, they must develop a cultural, this is a term that they coined, cultural paranoia. All right, we have to develop a cultural paranoia. You must develop a distrust. Now, I know that for some, it just triggers us to say, I'm not allowed to trust white people because we have our friends and people who you know, who you are friendly with, you know, and they might not be your friend all the time, but you're friendly with. So we could change the language to white systems, right? To white systems, to the white establishment. You can change the language however you like. But they say that in order to be healthy, you must have this cultural paranoia where you do not trust white systems and the white establishment. And I'm curious with the panel, when you read about this, what did you think about it? Did you agree with that, or do you disagree? What are your thoughts about the Black norm?
I think it could come across as a form of protection. I know from my own experiences, it can be really painful to assume that you are a part of a community and that you are welcomed into a space when the systems are like set against you, and the pain that comes from realizing that and seeing that, you know, not everyone is necessarily rooting for you. So I think since the time of enslavement, our journey has been about protection and survival. And I think that's where this stems from, is how can we protect ourselves?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alisha. You know, if we fast forward to the rewind to the beginning of the book, around page 4, the author makes the claim that all Black people are angry. I thought that was a big claim. Sometimes I wonder, are some of us not angry enough? One might even ask, are some of us too angry? What are your thoughts on this? Are Black people, are we all angry? Are some of us too angry? Are some of us not angry enough?
Yeah, I think that throughout the book, there's this like tension between what is conscious and what is subconscious. And I think that when we talk about, you know, Black anger, I would be inclined to agree that we're all, we have a sense of anger, but how that manifests itself is different for everyone, depending on their willingness to like comply or, you know, accept or internalize like the systems that are at play. And so, you know, for someone who is, you know, on the spectrum of closer to rebellion, there is deeper manifestation. You know, for someone who's more into like compliance and assimilation, then there is this sense of repression, you know, and later in the book, it just talks about what that looks like when, you know, that repression is revealed, you know, like it's an ugly process, and one where self-hatred starts to manifest and like all these other things. But, you know, there's undeniable, you can't deny the fact that it isn't there, and that these processes of repression aren't real. And so I'm in agreement. I would say that I think that's a pretty strong argument for it. And just as I was reading more of the text, like I'm like, wow, you do see those disruptions in people's ability to be able to subdue those type of sentiments.
Thank you so much. You know, Alisha, you asked a powerful question when we were having our briefing session for today. And you asked, why is Black anger even questioned? You know, I'm reminded of Patrick Henry, who on March 23rd, 1775, at the Second Virginia Convention said, "Give me liberty or give me death." All right. We celebrate that statement. But how come it's so controversial when a Black person, man or woman, has the same kind of anger? Why is Black anger questioned?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to watch the chat too to see if there are any questions there. But one of the things that popped up is like, what defines Black anger and Black rage? And it ties into that. There are so many things that make up the rage that we feel. And like we were talking about with the book, it covers so many different areas. Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint one thing, so it just bubbles over and becomes a situation where it's carrying you and you don't know necessarily where it started. I think Black people are one of the only groups that constantly has their rage questioned. And we as Black people sometimes feel like we need to validate that rage that we're feeling and not just sit with it and say, I deserve to feel this rage. And we also have to remember that this is generational. It's not just what I'm dealing with, it's what my mom is dealing with, what my grandma was dealing with, like her grandma. Like this is all passed down. So it's not just one isolated event or gathering of rage. It is years and years. So I think we as Black people have to be okay with the fact that we have rage and acknowledge that and work through that. So,
You know, that's a very good sentiment. On page 71, the authors asked a question that I think relates to what you're saying. Says the question we must ask is, what held the slave rebellion in check for so long? So what held the slave rebellion in check for so long? And so, that is a valid response that you give, Alisha. I want to now kind of pivot to the book's discussion on Black boys and Black girls. And we'll start with Black girls. But the book makes the claim that Black girls are robbed of feeling beautiful and feminine. And I was curious as to what are our panelists' thoughts on this. This is from page 49. And they even go as far as to talk about how a correlation between Black girls feeling like that they must suffer to feel loved through the symbol of the hot comb, that I have to, they get into the politics of hair, and that I have got to use the hot comb to straighten your hair, and that sends you through pain and suffering. And I'm telling you this, so I'm sending you through this so somebody will love you, so society will accept you. So it points out that Black girls are robbed of feeling beautiful and they're natural, and feeling naturally beautiful, and also robbed of feeling feminine. And I was curious as to our panelists' thoughts on the book's writings about the things that Black girls must endure.
Yeah, I feel like the Black girls should chime in on this. So, I definitely throughout the book, there's like this ongoing like theme of like whether or not we will comply with systems. And so about the systems that mandate what is beautiful and what is acceptable and what is most like aligned with like Eurocentric forms of just like beauty. That's a process. And so as we throughout, various points in our like existence have complied with that, then you have to honor the system. And when you're complying with the system, like that's a process. And so stepping outside of that, there's a reinforced, punishment. And when you are complying with it, there's a repression of your actual authentic self, which, can just sends people in different places. People who decide to want to step away from that, like that's a whole revelation that you've even like bought into a system. And so it gets really deep, like I wouldn't want us to just focus on, beauty as one of the systems that we comply with. Like all of this is systematic. And I think I look forward to us talking about the Black rage piece, because I think that on the other side of it, when we juxtapose this to like the words surrounding Malcolm X and just how there are just so much limitless like wording around his existence, then, you can apply the same thing to Black beauty and just what that means for people to actually seek their own personal truth around what beauty is for them, unrestricted, unrefined, and it means something different. And so, I think that definitely, we have gone through various periods where we've just been robbed of this ability to feel our true beauty.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Any feedback or further thoughts before you move on to Black boys?
Going off of what she just said about feeling robbed, there's a quote in that section, and it says, "Thus the Black woman is never free of the painful reminder that she must be transformed from her natural state to some other state in order to appear presentable to her fellow men." And I just think they go into this conversation about Black women and how hypersexualized we are, and the transformation that happens to like this asexual, the stereotypical mammy figure. And I think just going back to that idea of protection, because if I embrace my femininity as a Black woman, that also could invite, unwanted gazes and the situations that happened during the time period of enslavement. So once again, I think Black women have had to figure out a way to survive and try to thrive, but with the lens of protection always in the forefront. So if I can try to fulfill these ideals of Eurocentric beauty to a certain extent, but then kind of change that, I can still protect myself from things coming from the outside world.
Wow. Thank you so much for both of your insights. On page 59, he begins to talk about Black boys, and he says that Black boys are robbed of being assertive out of fear of what might happen to them if they become assertive. And it's important for us to put a bookmark here. We're going to bring this up again when we talk about the book's response to Black mothers. But I'm just curious as to the panel's thoughts on Black boys. Are Black boys robbed of feeling of being assertive? Are they, he told a story about how there was one Black boy who was walking down the street with his uncle, and a white man and his son come up, and the white man orders his son to beat up the Black boy. And the white man's son, who was older and bigger, beats up this little Black boy, and the uncle just watches, and how the son had to go through that trauma of dealing with his uncle who wasn't assertive to stop that, and him not being able to be assertive and fight back. And so they point out on page 59 that Black boys are robbed of being assertive. So it's just something that is true. How do you all feel about the sentiment? I'm curious, Russell, what are your thoughts about his take on Black boys and their plight?
Yes, I think that historically, that's a simple answer, right? Emmett Till certainly wasn't allowed to be assertive. On the plantation, you weren't allowed to be assertive. When there was a white water fountain, you weren't allowed to be assertive. At the front of the bus, you weren't allowed to be assertive, right? And so if manhood is defined as assertiveness, or even the right or the freedom to assert oneself, then Black men and Black people were not allowed that privilege. And he even talked about in the book how the ways we measure masculinity and assertiveness being the way one makes money, or the way that one climbs the ladder socially, or whatever the case may be. And even that was robbed. And so the question becomes, how can Black men show their value? And how can Black men even be valued in a system that does not lend them that freedom? And I think even as you asked the question about like natural hair, Black natural is not normal. So at the point where your natural is not normal, you either have to comply, or you can try to buck the system or create your own system. But These systems are predicated around whiteness, and whiteness is not necessarily white people, which I think somebody pointed out in the chat. Whiteness is an ideal. Whiteness is a look. Whiteness is a spirit. And so at times even Black people can participate in whiteness and white supremacy and white superiority just by way of internalized racism or by way of participating in these white systems in a way that is not authentic and in a way that doesn't promote Blackness. And so in terms of being assertive, I think you have to understand that when I'm getting pulled over by the police officer, that's certainly not the time I'm going to be assertive, right? So it's like, at what point can you be assertive and where can you pick and choose these moments? And so I agree with it. I think historically it's correct. And I think even now socially, I would say it's experientially valid as well.
Yeah, I used to think that everybody was ultra polite with the police until I got pulled over and my white friend or colleague was driving the car, and the way he berated the police, it's like something I had never seen before. So thank you so much, Russell, for your insights. All right, so we want to now progress to the Black family. And I mean, if you feel like we're jumping all over the place, because this book covers a broad scope and we're trying to get through and develop an arc here. And, when it talks about the Black family, Russell just brought up internalized white supremacy. And they talked about on page 79, colorism, even in the Black family. And, it's something that I think resonated with a lot of our panelists. And I'm curious of your thoughts on the book's discussion of colorism as it relates to the Black family.
Like Brittney was going to say something.
If you want it, you got it.
Oh, go ahead. You can go first. I think, so when you talk about, again, I was trying to say like whiteness is not necessarily synonymous with white people, right? And so if what you ascribe to and what you look up to is white, in the case of a white Jesus, right? A white savior, holiness being white, not Black, but white, right? If everything that you look up to is white, then if you look at your skin color and your skin color does not reflect that in the slightest, then it's difficult for you to value or to validate yourself if what you look up to is white. And so even in the Black community, there's still conversations about light skin versus dark skin. And the author mentioned that, and as if light skin is closer to whiteness. It's a type of beauty to look up to. I mean, we see it in the media all the time, but it's also part of very deeply ingrained in the community. Right? Like the media is not the only ones that look at Beyonce or Rihanna, right? But us in the Black community, it's difficult for us at times even to embrace an Erykah Badu, right? I'm not the average girl on the radio, right? NDRE, like these people, it's difficult for us to embrace them because we have been taught, whether consciously or subconsciously, that whiteness is something to be ascribed to, is something to be respected, and is something to be revered. And so in moments where you recognize your Blackness, even in a Black family, light skin versus dark skin, because one is closer to white, can be weaponized in a certain way that probably was not God's intention.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, all of these things so far, it's important to note that it's building up a case for where all the rage is coming from. And, on page 61, and I think it's important to know, Alisha said something great when we were discussing this this morning, that it's important for us to remember the origin of this. The origin of this is Black folks being out of context and having to negotiate, navigate, and resist white supremacy. So a lot of things we're talking about, you would be in error if you said, well, I'm a white person and my family struggles with racism, but it's okay because even Black people struggle with colorism. But you got to understand the source of why Black people struggle with colorism. That would be a mistake. And I appreciate Alisha saying that earlier. Alisha, before we talk about the book and its take on Black mothers, did you want to share any more thoughts on that, what you mentioned earlier, or did I do a good enough job?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so I personally, the book's take on Black mothers gave me pause. All right, and I just wondered if it was completely fair. right? And so it talked about how Black mothers are oftentimes the head of the household, and oftentimes to put themselves there to push assertiveness out of the males in their life who are under their authority, particularly their sons. And this causes rage in their sons as well. Now, the Black mothers are doing this to protect their sons because they know what happens when their sons are too assertive. They know what happens when their sons are too assertive. They know that there is a consequence for assertive sons and assertive husbands. So as an act of protection, the book says is that Black mothers have pushed themselves into the head of the household, and most Black households, that the Black family has a matriarchy, and they put themselves and they are there to push assertiveness out of males in their life, particularly their sons, who are under their authority. And I was curious, when you read this, I think it was around page 61, what was the panel's thoughts about the take on the Black mother in this book by our two authors?
To me, just hearing you give a high level synopsis of it, you have these questions of what is natural, what is unnatural. And through the processes of conditioning, we've learned these behaviors. And so when we think about how over time these behaviors have become normalized, like this whole question of what is pervasive, what is unconscious at this point, it just becomes a bigger question. I think it's so much harder for us to pinpoint dysfunction and learn behaviors that stem from systems that are white patriarchal systems that are reinforcing these unnatural ways of just viewing the world. And so again, each one of these is just a different example of a byproduct of the conditioned systems that we've been a part of and on the oppressive side of. And so the bigger question to me, and I hope that we hold enough space at the end here, is for us to just think about what does it mean for us now, and where do we go from here, and how do we find new alignment, and how do we get ourselves into a place of being able to reinstill values that have been lost.
Thank you so much, Brittney. Any other thoughts on the book's takes on the Black mother?
I definitely felt like it would have come across differently if it was written by a Black woman. Like I said before, the maternal mortality rate for Black women is very high. So we are risking our lives to bring Black children into the world. And the way it hit me was that it was unfair to kind of put the blame, is how I received it, on Black women and Black mothers, when, as I keep saying, it's out of a space of love. And how can I protect you when my hands are already tied and I can't fully protect you the way that I want to?
Thank you so much, Alisha. The last thing I had from page 81 was, the book says that Black people don't have a right to defend their family. And that, that really was a strong statement. And I think that even with Brittney Taylor, he didn't have a right to defend the Black woman who he was in love with. His defense of her cost her life. And so Black people don't have a right to defend their family. I wanted us to discuss that. Maybe we have more time to come back to it later. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, lift that up from page 81. Now we're going to move on to education. And, the book talks about a young man. This is a common story. In fact, unfortunately, I had a similar experience in elementary school where I told my teacher that I wanted to be, I believe I thought I want to be a lawyer or something. And my teacher told me that I should work at the airport because my family lived close to the airport. And so I had a similar experience. He talks about in this book how there was a young man who wanted to be an intellectual, and the teacher told him he should work with his hands. And there's nothing wrong with working with your hands. It's good. We need to lift up the technical traits and technical fields. But he said he felt like he was called to do something outside of the technical realm. And the teacher said, no, you will work with your hands. And the teacher went on a crusade to teach, to condition the parents to believe that their son wasn't smart. And so the book talks about how the parents, this is around 131 and 132, the parents became instruments for the school system's white supremacy, and how they were raising and rearing their child. And so the question that the book says is, that, well, not question, the assertion that white America thinks that Black people are stupid. White America thinks that Black people are stupid. Is this true? Does white America believe that Black people are stupid?
When I think about racism, and I want to actually kind of define it before I mention it. I don't look at race. For me, I separate racism, discrimination, prejudice, as like discrimination, prejudice, these things being under the umbrella of racism, and racism being defined as a system of power and privilege that belongs to a certain race. Let me begin with that disclaimer. When I think about racism, and racism being about power and privilege and resources, I don't think it's a matter of thinking other people are stupid. I think it's a matter of knowing how much power you have. When I played basketball, I didn't have to think they were stupid if I knew they were better than them. I just knew I had more power. And so I think that when you look at all of these systems as we're describing that uphold whiteness and white supremacy through discrimination and through prejudice, that points to a system that we call racism. I don't know whether they think Black people are stupid, because there's several of them that are, that I think even white people would say like, okay, he's intelligent or she's intelligent. But I think when you have the cards, you have the right to pull them whenever you want to, whenever you feel threatened or whenever you feel like somebody's getting even with you or taking any sort of power.
Okay, thank you so much. A question that came up in our discussions was, what are the tools that we're using to teach our children? And in the book, there's talks about beating children, and it talks about how beating has its origins in slavery, and how children were being beat, which was also creating rage inside of them. But a lot of times, I think the book talks about how the beatings was a tool being used on the parents. I mean, erroneously, nonetheless, but a tool being used to try to help condition their children to get along with the white supremacist system. And this is kind of curious as to, you all's thoughts on the book talking about beating, the beating of children, and what tools should we be using to teach our children?
And I mean, I think this reinforces some of the other ideas, is that in our conditioning, we've been conditioned to hurt to be able to try to protect, which is something that the book just talked about when you were talking about earlier about the ability of the Black family to protect, how that's been compromised. And so, again, we have another example of how when we are complying to systems, like the way that we act is something that is unnatural. It's a way that, Black mothers love their children. They have to hurt, be able to condition their kids to honor systems that they don't want to hurt them in a different way. And so it gets really nuanced and layered. And I just want to hold space for what the previous panelist was saying, Russell, about the whole fact that when we talk about intersectionality, I know we started off talking about race and gender as one of the limitations, but definitely, since 1968, the conversations around the intersectionality of race and class, oftentimes we're seeing, whiteness be something that's more, of a mixed bag of colors that are projecting that whiteness and reinforcing those systems and doing, being the face of oppression. So I think that, everything here is a baseline that continues to become way more nuanced in 2020, even around, the references to Brittney Taylor and just like the reinforcements of punishment, like it was just talking about how Black slave husbands were not able to protect their Black wives. And so like you see so many striking parallels between, then and now, in ways that are all grounded in this idea of systems. The same systems continue to be what we're I mean, living around. So as long as we bind systems, that's the biggest detriment.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because like one thing I heard on what you were saying was that like, if I can't defend you against the system, then I'm going to beat you into submission of it. Right. And so, which is terrible. Right. And so, yes, wonderful thoughts in general, but that's one thing I wanted to elevate, but I really appreciated the whole corpus of your response there. And so, the book deals with education, and it talks about how education kind of was used as the tool during the industrialization of America to kind of prepare people to work in factories and industry. And when I was shocked to read this in the 60s, right? But they talked about how when these menial jobs left, it kind of made the words the author uses, as uncomfortable as that's uncomfortable as it may make you feel, is that it kind of makes Black people useless, because we've been objectified and commoditized as to be seen as a labor force. And so that brings into question, then what is the school system now doing if it was designed to prepare? We have somebody sharing the screen. This is not authorized screen sharing. So we will definitely want to stop this screen sharing. And so want to make sure we're not getting Zoom bombed. But that was ISOM. So we just want to keep an eye on that. Just want to alert the moderators. But nevertheless, what's happening with the school system now, and what they saw this then. So what's happening now? What is the mission? What is the purpose? What are we driving our children to? And the last thing I want to point out is that on page 143, it talks about Black intellectuals' gifts are minimized. And throughout my life, I personally have met a lot of insecure Black scholars who felt that if they got their PhD, then the white establishment, and I see someone in the comments saying that white people aren't a monolith. So we have been speaking very systemically. So we're not talking about your white friend or your white buddy. We're talking about the white system and the white establishment that controls and runs this country. So we're not talking about your friend or your next door neighbor or whatever, or you, I don't know, but we're talking about the system, the culture. We're talking about the institution of the white establishment. And so, I know people who felt like that, well, once I get my PhD, then the white establishment will accept me. And they get it, and they find that they're marginalized on their campuses. They're marginalized at the Ivy League school they're working at. They still cannot escape this reality. And real quickly, before we move on, was going to ask you all, what are your thoughts on Black intellectuals' gifts being minimized? Have any of you ever experienced that? And did you have any thoughts from page 143, real briefly, before we make room for the final chapter here?
I mean, one could argue, does Black intellectualism actually exist? And have we transcended, the Eurocentric barriers of what, intelligence and intellectualism are? We haven't existed in a space where we've seen Black superiority or Black dominance. Everything has been always within the context of white superiority. And so it's just like, I think that one could make an argument. And we're going to get to this in later chapters, but there's some other points that the book makes just about, just the internalization of whiteness. And so there's this ever-going cycle of us evaluating ourselves according to how we've evolved through the system. And so until I mean, what we're talking about here is just even so hard to conceptualize for me personally. So I think that it's a great question to ask. I mean, even when we think about, let's go back to what we were talking about with beauty, right? And we talk about like this liberation that we're in right now around, people being uninhibited, but it's still very much so tailored, right? It's like I am natural within these barriers, like this is acceptable. It's not, I haven't experienced a sweeping movement of just unrestricted Blackness. And so I would make the same argument within Black intellectualism. Like, I don't think that we have seen, an unrestricted manifestation of Black intelligence to just explore itself and build upon itself.
Thank you so much. And as we come around to a conclusion here, I appreciate two comments. Somebody said that Michelle Obama was called an ape and she was in the White House. And another person pointed out that Henry Louis Gates Jr. was arrested for breaking into his own home. And, he had been living in that community for quite some time before that event had happened, which makes it even more damning. And so thank you so much for that. And that are Brittney, you provide us with some very thought-provoking questions there. And I appreciate those nuances as well. There's a Black mental health section that we kind of covered earlier, and something that we talked about with our reflections around page 157 and 158 was creating our own methods of healing that speak directly to people of African descent. Maybe I can turn here real quickly. It says, in sum, let us enter a plea for the clinical clinicians who can distinguish unconscious depression from conscious despair, paranoia from adaptive worriness, and who can tell the difference between a sick man and a sick nation. So who can tell the difference? I thought this was very profound. Who can tell the difference between a sick person and a sick nation? So it's saying that, and this may, people they talk very poorly about Black people and our distrust of mental health professionals. But but as with many things with Black people, there may be a reason for why there is that distrust, because maybe, like the authors point out, there is a problem between distinguishing a sick person and a sick nation. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
Man, that's deep. I said my background is in social work. So when we think about that, I mean, I don't want the same way I kind of, have pushback against like just following on law enforcement is just kind of the martyr for this sick nation concept. Our Black therapists, our therapist community in whole, our educators, like you can go to any system and you can't really just say that this is the only problematic piece of the puzzle. Like this is a pervasive sickness. And so it's interesting how often we focus on the individuals rather than the systems. And, I think that tension there between a sick man and a sick nation, we often go to try and treat the sick man without ever treating the sick nation that continues to like create sick men, both treated and untreated across, society. And so we only seem to really want to address one of the sicknesses when the other one is the true source. And so, I think that, this is so provocative. And I think that it would be interesting. You could create a whole, conference around just healing a sick nation. And, we haven't really ventured very deep into that discussion, but it definitely needs to be, honored.
Right. Amen. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, that's so true. Law enforcement oftentimes say that the law enforcement are the soldiers. If they are the soldiers, then who's giving the orders? It's a broader thing happening. And I thank you for lifting that up too for people who work in the mental health field as well. So thank you so much, Brittney. All right, so now we are in the conclusion of our book where they kind of tie it all up together, and we kind of work hard to formulate two questions to try to help us to really sum up this book and this final chapter. And so this is a time where our panelists can really get out how they felt about the book and Black Rage. And we're doing this through the question about Malcolm X, because the chapter, final chapter, the first part of it really focuses on Malcolm X and his story and who he was. And we are trying to grab onto a healthy rage. I was talking to a friend just the other day, and I said to him that rage is like a fire. You can use it to cook your food. You can use it to warm your home, but it can also burn your house down as well. And so we want to have a healthy rage that's productive and fruitful. And the question is, did Malcolm X have a healthy rage?
Okay. I think so. I think looking at him and his journey can speak to, the greater community of Black people. Brittney posed the question earlier, like, what can we do in 2020? Like, we have all of these things that we're realizing, and like, where does the healing and unlearning begin within our own community? And I think he's a great example of that. And just being on a spiritual journey and looking at how that informs the way you view the world. So I think pairing the spiritual aspect of it is what transforms the rage into a healthy rage.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that the big question here, did he have a healthy rage? Did Malcolm X transcend a white supremacist system? Everything that we've talked about is our ability or inability to be able to transcend the system. And when I was reading, I just looked at the words just associated with Malcolm X, and the words were just so, they were words that, we don't really equate the Black experience to being able to embody. Words of growth, of evolution, of development. And I'm trying to find the exact, what page is the exact beginning of that?
It starts at page 200.
Yeah, because
202.
I was taking some really good notes around this chapter, and it was, like words like growth, evolution, change, seeking after truth, limited by no creed, outgrown, like a life that was dynamic. And so I think that definitely, he definitely was able to transcend Black rage, and was able to just be his own man, so much so that he was a threat, because there was a growing movement around him. He was an influencer. And so this idea that he could potentially lead the dismantling of the system was something that was questioned by someone, whether consciously or subconsciously. I'm curious, like, how people reconcile that, the people who were most threatened by him. But there was something in him that was sparking new interests to be able to, like, move differently than what these systems would have Black people move as. And so
thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I think,
Russell.
I think it's I'm not really a fan of defining healthy rage, right? And the reason being is, if I were to hit somebody in the face, I wouldn't tell them the correct way to respond to me hitting them without, first of all, expecting somebody to address the fact that I hit them. And I think that that's what we see often times as it relates to rage, even protesting, right? People speak up when property's being burnt, but they don't speak up when bodies are lying in the street. And so I think to address the response without addressing the initial action would do ourselves a huge injustice. And so do I think Malcolm X had rage? I think for Malcolm X to have an embodied enough experience to experience rage and to articulate rage and to want to respond to that rage when Black people were not given that privilege, when Black people were not allowed to be embodied in any sense. I think the fact that he felt it deserves to be stated over and above anything else. And I think so often we fall into the system, which is, again, why I say whiteness instead of white people, right? Because I say it like I've had worse experience with Black police officers than I have white police officers. So that's why I say whiteness, right? People, these systems that perpetuate it. I think when you talk about Black rage, and is there such thing as healthy rage? I don't want to talk about the rage unless I talk about the initial action. And particularly as it relates to, we kind of brushed over, but one of the Black man's main jobs at this time was to protect your family. And so what do you do when you can't protect the family? From, in this case, right, we're just using them as the martyrs, the policing, but then also you don't get any justice from the justice system or whatever you want to call it. Like, how do you respond to that? But the response is so centered around how I want to grade them on how well they responded to the action without talking about the fact that the action keeps perpetuating itself and happening over and over and over again. Yeah. Just because it's not on your timeline doesn't mean it's not happening, and it's not on my timeline.
Russ, I really appreciate what you're saying. I agree with your sentiment, but I want to lift up that I think it's a multi-layered conversation, right? So I think that oppressors have no right to tell the oppressed how they can rage. But I think as oppressed people, we've got to rage in a way that doesn't destroy us. You know what I mean? I mean, for our own spiritual formation, for the sake of our own souls, like we've got to try to raise in a way that does not cause us to meet our demise, because we don't want to fall into fatalism, and so, but I definitely agree and really appreciate what you're saying. And we had a comment earlier. These are wonderful comments, and I don't have time to find. Oh yeah, the comment set for one person said, "This is the calmest discussion on Black rage ever. We edit ourselves so much." I don't think that we're editing ourselves. I think there's a lot of rage in this conversation. I think there's a lot of rage and there's a lot of anger. I think there's a lot of hurt in this conversation. But I do appreciate the thought. And I do think that it's sometimes pathological not to rage. Like if I see a person being abused or a person being harmed or a person with a knee on their neck and they are there dying and crying out for their mother, if I don't rage, there's something wrong with me. I'm dead on the inside. I'm dead on the inside if I don't rage. And so the book concludes with this on page 202, final thoughts. They say that we believe that the Black masses will rise with a simple and eloquent demand to which new leaders must give tongue. They will say to America simply, "Get off our backs. Get off my neck. Get off. Get off my brother's neck. Get off my sister's neck. Get off." The problem will be so simply defined. What is the problem? The white man, the white person, has crushed all but the life from Blacks from the time they came to these shores to this very day. What is the solution? Get off our backs. How? By simply doing it now. So I'm curious your final thoughts on this concluding sentiment from our volume for today. Each panelist can give us a few seconds of your final thoughts on get off of our backs.
I think for me, one of the ways to do that is find, we kind of talked about it earlier, but finding a way within the diaspora and something that's rooted out of, African practices for our healing. Because going back to beauty, if I'm trying to embrace my beauty and femininity, but I'm doing it by these Eurocentric systems, that would not make sense for me. I can't heal myself and learn to love myself if I'm doing it by European ideals. So I think as a community, one of the ways we step forward is reaching back and the idea of Sankofa and going back to where we came from and using, those things to replenish the things that were depleted from our community. And that's one of the ways that I would like to leave this conversation is how can we unlearn all of these things that are still happening and we're still, perpetuating within our own community from the outside and in, and leaving with kind of a hopefulness that we can unlearn and reconnect with each other throughout the diaspora in a healthy way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alisha. Russell.
Yeah, I think when we read this and we highlighted it, I thought it was prophetic in the worst way possible, right? Get off of our backs, get off of our neck. And the reason I lifted the last comment I did is not because I am a violent protester, right? I am a protester. I'm a protester of nonviolence. I just don't believe in prioritizing something that shouldn't be prioritized. So hypothetically speaking, when you're watching the officer with his knee in George Floyd's neck, my question to you is, what is your ethical Christian response if you're there on the scene? Like you can't do ethics based off of a reaction without first of all addressing the action. Do you pray for him while his knee is in his neck? And knee in his neck is physically like there, like it's filled with life in this case, but all the other systems that have their knee in our back and their knee in our neck, whether it be economic, whether it be like all these different ones that we've been highlighting, I would just pose the question, what is the ethical response if you're there? Is it to record it? Is it to pray? Is it to hope that the justice systems? I think ethics needs to be nuanced even in a Christian sense, not to promote violence, but to really pinpoint where the violence began so that we can begin having healthy and whole lives.
Amen. Big up to situational ethics. I really appreciate what you're saying. We've got to do the right thing at all times. Thank you. All right. And Brittney.
Yeah, I just close, just always being reminded, we have to be very sensitive to division, and that whenever division happens, there is a very difficult process of not creating a hierarchy in that division. And so in that, we see that, race has been one of the tools that has been very consistent in a great way to create division amongst people. For me personally, I, I don't believe that it's the will of God for us to spend so much time focused on, division, and really things that are rooted in fear, rooted in self-hatred of various forms. And so the big question is, how do we transcend it, getting back to who we're called to be and how we're called to live with each other. And so I think that as these things warp into new things, where we have Black people being a part of and operators of whiteness, then it's going to create a different spin on these conversations. And so I think that we need to just be sensitive to how we can be the person that we're telling ourselves to get your foot off of my back, or get off of our back. That could be a message that we could be sending to someone who's a part of our community. And so rather than focusing on others, I think that we should bring this conversation inward and just focus on what we can do, what we continue to do, both to ourselves and to others. And just take, power back in this conversation from knowing that we're committed to being dynamic and being, evolved beings through all of this sickness,
Well, thank you so much. I mean, may the Lord show mercy if Black people ever raged against it in the same way that we rage against one another. I just want to thank you all so much for your time of reading this book. I think this was a difficult book to read, a very challenging book to read, but I'm grateful that you took the time to do it and to share your thoughts on this panel. I want to thank you, Brittney, Russell, and Sister Alisha, for your time with our panel today. I know you all are busy and have a lot of things going on, but I'm grateful for you. I want to also thank the Carl Spain Center again for your time and letting us share our thoughts today. All right. God bless you all.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lawrence and Brittney, Alisha, Russell. Thank you all so much for this panel. This panel, it went to the places it needed to go, right? We got to do some work analyzing what we're dealing with, y'all. We can't just sit around and think that we can have some surface level conversations and it's going to help move us forward. We got to dig deep. That's why it's treating the root of racism. We gotta get beneath the soil, y'all. We can't just still play the surface level games and think we're going to get where we need to go. If we're going to have anything that's going to move us forward, we have to go to the places that are the most uncomfortable, even for those of us that do this work day in and day out. Too many times we stay on the surface level, and those that do this work, or at least claim to do this work day in, day out, we don't go deep enough, right? We stay surface because it's easy, it's comfortable, and we got to go deep. And so part of that work happened here today, and thank y'all so much for taking us there. I'm reminded through the discussion what a interesting and sick creation America has done, as it created whiteness, and through that sickness, then we had to respond with Blackness. I want y'all to think about that creation. Whiteness was created on this soil, y'all. I want us to remember, when we say words matter, we were calling folks Anglo-Saxon, we were calling folks British, Italian, other things, right? We created the construct of whiteness here, and we have to be willing to admit that and unpack what that means. And I'm so thankful for the work that's happening in the Carl Spain Center. They're unpacking these constructs of white supremacy and also unpacking our response as a Christian community to those pieces. Before we jump into our break, I want to give some time to Curtis King. Curtis King is going to come and take some time to engage the community in a conversation about some things that we need from the Carl Spain Center. So I'll toss it over to you, Curtis King.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Byron. And I'll be very brief. I am actually very honored to be a part of the advancement team for the Carl Spain Center. And so in addition to making sure that you're registered for today's event, because that's what will give you access to all of the handouts that they mentioned, we also encourage you to visit the center's website to learn more about the organization, which is the continuation of the life work of Dr. Jerry Taylor, as well as many others who walk alongside him with the same mission. On the site, you'll be able to keep up with other upcoming events and to sign up for the email list. When you sign up for the email list, you will get the monthly newsletter. And so again, that'll keep you in the loop. You're also invited to consider partnering with us financially to keep these very rich, vital conversations going. So you're going to find information on the website about donations, but I would also like to make myself available for dialogue with any individual, church, or organization who might be interested in learning more about financial partnerships. I'm going to place the web address as well as my email address in the chat stream, and you'll be able to contact me if you're interested in that conversation. That really is all that I have. Thank you very much, Byron. And I echo the sentiments of everyone that this is an extremely important, vital conversation, uplifting and encouraging. So thank you to all the panelists so far, and I look forward to the rest of the event. Byron?
Thank you so much, Curtis. Folks, we're going to take a 7-minute break. I'm giving you 2 extra minutes from this morning. And what an incredible opportunity it is. I'm giving you 7 minutes. Be back here ready to go at 3:15. And we're going to walk into a conversation on white rage. It's going to be led by Travis Stanley. So be back here with us at 3:15. Take a break, stretch your legs a little bit, take some time to reflect, and we'll be back together soon.